Good afternoon. I'll call to order the January 8th, 2013 Sioux Falls City Council informational meeting. Welcome all of those here at Carnegie Town Hall and those watching live on CityLink and on siouxfalls.org. Good to have you here. We'll begin this afternoon's meeting with a staff report from City Clerk Lori Hogstead. Welcome.
Thank you. All right. Council Chair Erfenbach and fellow council members, first of all, I want to let you know that our new ordinance books have arrived, and Dave Fifley will demonstrate and show you one of our books. There are actually two sets, so two books to each set. And the books just arrived, well, at the end of December, and they were all delivered by the first of the year. Both volumes, Volume 1, Volume 2. We also have the ordinances available online, and the really neat thing is we used to hand out between city staff and city employees and some of the county departments around 70 some sets, and now we've got it down to 40. So most people are using online. In fact, the police department completely online, and so we love that we won't have all those bulky books all over. Of course, the attorney's office has the most, but they do need the books, and some just prefer the books over the online version. But for the public, the online version can be found under siouxfalls.org, of course, our website, and you can either just in the search toolbar put in the word ordinance, and that's the first item that will show up, or you can choose the mayor and city council tab, and it will take you, give you a link right to our ordinances, and that will take you directly to American Legal, which is the publishing company that put the ordinances together. We've been finding just a few little odd and end things that we need to have amended and revised, and that's probably normal with such a large project. And so if you do notice anything, any of the departments or citizens, whoever it may be, that doesn't seem quite right, let me know. I'm compiling a list of some things that we would like updated. And our first supplement will be rather large. We get supplements generally every couple of months. And our first one should be pretty large because we will have all the ordinances adopted at the end of the year, which are not part of this, and I have received calls on that already. They will be included in the first supplement, and then as well as any corrections that may need to be made that just were missed prior to that. One thing that we have had a few calls on is people are asking, well, you know, before I know that alcoholic beverages was Chapter 5, how do I find that now? And, you know, you can look at the directory and possibly find it, but there's also, at the very end of Volume 2, there's a tab right before the index for Code of Ordinances Parallel References. And what that does is it references South Dakota Codified Law, as well as we'll show you if it used to be, you know, Chapter 5, 5.08, where will you find that now? Or, of course, you can also call us because we have a set of the previous books on hand so we can look things up. One thing that I think is kind of neat with this reference, and I just noticed this today, was that they also have references to resolutions and ordinances. So, for instance, if you go to the end of the list, it will say, for instance, Ordinance 1806, when it was adopted and where you can find those changes now from that ordinance. And sometimes that's a challenge when we have an ordinance that's passed and we're looking, well, where in the code was that included? I mean, generally it's fairly easy to find, but that will just give us one more tool to be able to find those items in a faster manner. So I will be sending out a memo this week to the city directors and asking them to share that with their staff to just take a look, a cursory look through their sections, make sure everything looks good. And then, you know, let me know if they have any changes to those. And then also as a reminder that they will need to update, you know, their templates, their web pages, any applications and so on. You know, you don't realize how many places you reference a certain section of the ordinances. I think about the business licensing, you know, Jamie will have a number of items to change. And so it will just be a friendly reminder to take a look at that and get those updated over time. So anyway, we're so happy to have the books here and hopefully well utilized. The second item, and this is something that came up recently, we had a question from a citizen that was wondering if we had any type of listening devices. And when we had our upgrade done to the audio and visual equipment in this room this summer, we did receive new devices. And we have 9 of these available. I tested one out today. It's pretty amazing how well you can hear with this, because sometimes I'll even notice when I'm sitting back here that I don't always hear very well when people are speaking this way if they're not speaking very loud. So, you know, we love for people to use these. And, you know, it just goes onto your ear just like a headset from a phone or a cell phone. We're going to get some bacterial wipes to have on hand because they don't contain the little pads on there that we can change. And I mean, really very easy to operate. There's just one button, you turn it on, and that's also the volume button. And then you will get a display on the front of this that will show you that indeed it's on, the battery is charged, etc. And there's a clip if you want to clip it to your belt or clip it to your jacket or something, or just hold on to it. And we, like I said, we have 9 of these available. And what I was talking to Rich Murphy a little bit earlier from CityLink. We were talking about these and how little they were really utilized before, and we'd love for people to use them. That we might even make a little stand and have those available with just very simple instructions, and then just please return when you're done. And but in the meantime, if anyone, any citizens or council members wishes to use them, certainly ask any of the council staff, and we will make those available. And if anyone wants to try one out today, they sure can. Have one ready to go. So anyway, I just want to make that everyone aware that we do have those devices, and they work really, really well. So. Any questions? Otherwise, that's the end of my report.
Questions for Lori? Council members? Good. Thank you very much. Pretty excited about those books, aren't we? They're can do a 2-arm workout with them. Yeah, great. Moving on, Fiscal Committee report from the meeting of Wednesday, January 2nd, 2013.
Got it right
Councilor
here.
Karski.
We had one agenda item for the Fiscal Committee last week, and want to echo Councilor Jameson's comments, and thanks to the Police Department and Finance for bringing this to the Council. It wasn't an item that they probably had to, but it's a great use of the committees of the City Council to give us a heads up on things that are happening. It's better to find out this way than it is kind of maybe through alternative methods. So the subject was on the police department and anticipatory staffing that they're going to have. Fortunately for us, they don't have any retirements this year, but many police officers, according to Chief Bartell, by many, at least 13, are going to be putting their retirement off until 2013. So it takes about 8 months to get a 2014, thank you, we are in 13. Takes about 8 months to get a police officer up to speed and fully trained, so we're started the process basically. So, and according to Tracy and Chief Bartell, shouldn't be any need for any increased funding for staffing based on where we're sitting right now.
Great, good. Thank you for your report. Questions or comments for Councilor Karski or the committee? All right, thank you very much. Moving on to City Council open discussion. Councilor Staggers.
A number of people have been wondering about my voice, and so just let me mention what happened some time ago. I fell down a flight of steps, and in the process, I severely hurt I have a lot of pain in my back. I don't have any broken bones or anything like that, but there's severe pain. To counter the pain, I'm taking this medicine, which is causing my vocal cords to tighten up, so that's what's happening. I hope this gets over with really soon, though.
Oh, bless your heart. We almost need an interpreter. We'll have to have someone speak for Councilor Staggers. Thank you, though, for giving us the update. Just in case it wasn't heard, it is a result of medication that is for a pain in your back, and that it is tightening your vocal cords and making it difficult to speak. We're going to work the best that we can so that we can hear when you need to comment. We appreciate the update.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other comments for open discussion from council? I do have a couple of things. First of all, and this is at the behest of Councilor Rolfing, and you're right, February 12th is Sioux Falls Day at the legislature, and many of us often go to that event. Some of us will ride buses with business people, and some of us will go up individually. But it is an opportunity to represent Sioux Falls at the legislature, and it is February 12th, which is a Tuesday. And since Councilor Rolfing brought this up, I have found that there are at least 4 of us that will be attending that meeting, and there will be at least a 5th person unable to be at our meetings that evening anyway, so we will not have a quorum on February 12th. And so it would be my preference, knowing we've also checked there is nothing on the agenda at this point. So if the council doesn't object, we would bring a resolution forward next week to cancel that February 12th meeting. Unless you're just dying to have a meeting on that Wednesday. I mean, we certainly can, but there doesn't seem to be anything pressing that has come forward. So thoughts, comments, you're okay with canceling, Councilor Karski?
Only concern would be regarding any contracts that we may have to approve. So I guess, I don't know what the latest we can cancel the meeting is, but I think we need to be aware of that in case we're holding up any sort of projects or contracts that
Good point, really good point. Other comments? I think our attorney's looking at that right now. Other comments on February 12th? Thoughts? No, you're right on. And maybe what we would do is call a special meeting for that Wednesday if something were to come up. But I'll have Attorney Fifley look at that while I go ahead and talk about the other item that I have. The mayor's staff has asked if council would be, they asked a year ago if we could do event center updates every month, and we have been doing that for several months in a row. We're at a point now where the event center is being built, and we can see it online, we can see the webcam, we can see all sorts of updates. So the mayor's staff has asked if we might change that to every other month, starting in March. So we would actually have our January 22nd would be an update, and then not again until March. And I said that was probably okay, but that I would run it past you as a group anyway. I'm getting nods of heads. All right, so that is what we will be doing. Yes, Councilor Rolfing.
Will all the contracts, the bids, be out by that time? Probably should be by that time, I would think.
No,
so
I'm
we
not-
should be okay.
I'm not sure, but
That's the
Councilor
only
Rolfing, it
thing
would
that
all
I-
be, we see all the contracts in our, all the
Yeah.
contracts.
And I think we'll have a full update on that on the 22nd
Okay.
at that meeting, too.
That'd be a good question.
We'll ask that, Kendra, that we be
Right.
updated. I'm sure they will.
And I think, too, the other thing that, as I talked with the mayor's staff about it, was that if we have questions, that we are absolutely to ask, and if we want them to come, you know, absolutely at any time, and if you feel like you need to give a call or, you know, clarifications or whatever, and the same goes for citizens. If they have concerns about those issues and they're not being answered online, that they certainly should give a call. So that was kind of the feeling that a formal update would be every other month, at least for a while, until we get down to kind of where we're doing the nuts and bolts at the end. So that is what we will do, and I will go back to, did you figure out whether we can? We could cancel a meeting on 24-hour notice, or start one on 24-hour notice. So if it's all right, I apologize, I'm jumping around. February 12th, again, the Sioux Falls Day at the legislature. I would like us to cancel that meeting by resolution next week. I will ask the attorney to put that together. If something, though, because point well taken, if there are contracts that need to be approved that week, we will call a special meeting for that Wednesday just to approve those contracts or to review them. Yes,
I
Councilor.
think as we attend the leadership meetings, too, we can surely on this Friday make the directors aware of the situation and give them plenty of notice so that if there are any questions that do come up, they can get a hold of us, too.
Right, exactly. Yep, if we need to do that. So give ourselves a little break, and those of us that head for Pier, that will be a good time for us to do that as well. I encourage other citizens to attend that as well. It is a chamber-sponsored event, the Sioux Falls Day at the Legislature, February 12th, and all the information will be online very shortly, I'm sure. Any other items for City Council open discussion this afternoon before we move on? Very good. Moving into our presentations, we'll begin with an update on SIRE, which we always use that word. And so explain what SIRE is, but and the City Link Equipment, Sue Kwan Becketten, the Director of Central Services. Thank you, Sue.
Good afternoon. Sue Kwan Becketten, Director of Central Services. I thought I'd start with giving you a very high-level overview of the configuration in the control room downstairs. Just for your information, keep in mind that this is at least 10,000 feet, maybe even 30,000 feet up, but it does identify the main components that we use. And I thought you might be interested to learn more about that. So I'll just kind of walk you through this diagram. Like I said, it's very high level. The inputs from our 4 robotic cameras, and of course all of our inputs from the presentation system here that we put in May of this year, all go down to the video switch, which is, and everything else on this diagram is in our control room downstairs in the basement, and our camera operator is down there, of course, during all of our meetings. So the video switch is what controls the outputs to all kinds of things. One of those is the DVD recorder. This is strictly so we have a backup file of the taping of each of the meetings. So in case we have a technical difficulty, we have that to fall back on. So it's a DVD file, and we end up converting that, if we need to a different file type so that we can publish it on siouxfalls.org. So that's a backup. The other place that it goes is the distributor amplifier. This is a very important piece of equipment, and it controls where all of the other outputs go. So the Stream Z, for example, our digital rapids recorder, is a server. And what that does is it creates our rebroadcast file for CityLink. So while we're doing the taping and while we're doing the switching, while all the meetings are going on, that is recording the rebroadcast file that we'll end up using later on when we do our rebroadcasts on CityLink TV. The other thing it does is it puts an output into our Sire encoder server, and that is part of the Sire system, which is all to do with web streaming. Keeping in mind that Sire is much bigger than that. The City of Sioux Falls uses Sire as our document imaging system. So in other departments within city government, we're doing our scanning projects right now, blueprints in planning and building services. We'll be doing more for the clerk's office in terms of ordinances and resolutions. So just keep in mind that when we talk about Sire, Sire is bigger than just web streaming. But what we're talking about today is strictly the web streaming portion of Sire. So we have that encoder. The encoder gets its instructions through the Clerk's Agenda Plus module, which is up here in council chambers, and that goes through the Sire app server, and that feeds into the encoder. So that's how it knows to go live and stream. From there, we do have a path for the city employees, and that's what the internal users is referring to. We don't have enough bandwidth within our network for all of the potential people that would want to see the web streaming. So we only use our internal server for our internal users. Everything else goes through the internet and goes to our host provider. And that's where the web streaming service is and the video archive. And that, again, that's because they have greater bandwidth than we do. The other pathway, so all of this stuff below has to do with our rebroadcast file for CityLink, and then the web streaming. And then going more towards the top, you'll see the Midco and Nology. And as you know, we broadcast to now both of those cable providers. Nology is new as of 2012, so we're really glad to get them on board so that they are also broadcasting our meetings live while they're taking place. So you'll see the go live switches in between, and then we have one signal that goes out to Mid-Continent and another signal that goes out to Nology so that they can broadcast the meetings. And then one other thing to point out to you is the backup encoder. This is something new that we've just added in the last couple of weeks. This will be a redundant way for us to do web streaming. So say, for example, if something happened to the Sire encoder or the Sire app server, and we weren't able to do it in the usual fashion, we can use the cable output to go through a different, separate encoder and web stream that way. So, like I said, we just put this in, but it will give us a redundant means of web streaming. So that's the brief overview. Then I wanted to go through recent events. in terms of when we have had a couple of issues with the web streaming service. On December 10th, for the Audit Committee meeting, we discovered that we did have problems with the web streaming, and essentially it was down. We, of course, did the broadcast to Midconology, and, of course, later on published it to siouxfalls.org. But that day of the meeting, we were unable to web stream. The following day, on December 11th, we spent several hours with our vendor on the phone to try to troubleshoot and pinpoint the problem with the web streaming. Now, keep in mind, I don't have a system engineer on staff. So we have to rely on our vendor to assist us with this type of diagnosis and problem solving. We did spend several hours that day plugging and unplugging things and trying to diagnose the problem. We were unable to. So December 11th is the other day where we had web streaming problems. We did do the broadcast, of course, through CityLink. Later on that week, our vendor came in as we instructed them to do, and they were able to diagnose the problem as a cabling issue. So simple enough to fix, difficult to diagnose if you're not an engineer. One other date I wanted to point out was on December 18th, which was the following week. We had a little bit of delay with our CityLink signal, about a 2-3 minute delay in being able to get that broadcast up and operational. We were able to diagnose that with our vendor, who had to come in again per our request because we had a broadcast issue, and they diagnosed that as a circuit board issue. So, I mean, there's just so many variables involved, and like I said, I just wanted to kind of lay out high level the complexity of the control room downstairs, just to give you an idea of what we have down there. But it does provide great services to the citizens to be able to web stream and to do our broadcast on CityLink. So what have we done to address these issues? Number one, we created that redundant process that I just described to you for the web streaming, so we can use the cable output if we needed to, if we had a problem with the actual encoder server. So we've got that in place, ready to go, and we have requested that our vendor design and spec out for us a redundant solution for the broadcast signals. I don't have more information on that yet, other than we've placed that request with them and would like to know the costs associated with something like that. So I will share that information with you as soon as I get it. We have also instituted a formal testing process on meeting day. So the morning of any meeting day when we're going to be broadcasting and web streaming, with the assistance of council staff, we will be testing our web streaming as well as our cable outputs to Midconology. And this will give us a little more time in the event that we do uncover a problem that morning to try to rectify the situation before we get to the afternoon meetings. The last thing is that we're also working with our vendor to identify a local resource that either they can contract with or we can contract with directly to be able to get even faster response time when we do have an issue. So that's my report. Do you have questions for me?
Questions from Council for Sioux. Councilor Anderson.
I think just one. When you were discussing the bandwidth, is there a need for us to increase that bandwidth? And if there is, how much would it cost us?
Well, we can certainly look into that, yeah, and do the cost comparison to see what are we paying for the hosting service and what would it cost to, John, you don't know off the top of your head, right? Okay, we'll look into that for you and I'll let you know.
My second question was going to be about a local vendor, but you already answered that, so thank you.
Councilor Rolfing.
My question is about the local vendor. How close are we to either finding out if they can identify somebody who can come in? Because, yeah, I would think that would be a crucial part of
Yes.
this.
I'm hopeful that before the end of the month,
Okay.
we will have someone identified. I have had a couple people raise their hands already to indicate that they're qualified. I will let our vendor do the vetting to see if they have the proper qualifications to do that service for us.
One more thing. I want to know if Mark Cotter helped you with this diagram.
He did not, actually.
We have another one?
I don't know if Mark has one or not.
No, I mean, we have another one like Mark coming up.
Oh, yeah.
You'll never live it down, Mr. Cotter. Other questions for Sue? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on in our presentations, we'll do the internal audit reports with Rich Oaksel, lead internal auditor.
Good afternoon, Council. We have 3 audit reports on the agenda. I think we'll start with the ones that will have maybe perhaps less questions. All 3 of these reports were discussed with the Audit Committee at our December meeting, the one where we had the technical problems. I remember that meeting. It was a feedback sound for about 2 minutes. You should have hard copies in front of you, and the first report we'll look at is the Ryan White Title III grant audit. And Ryan White was a well-known AIDS victim that died about 20 years ago, and this federal grant was named in his honor. And the money is used by health clinics to pay for the primary care for AIDS, HIV patients. And the city receives about $390,000 from this grant, and the health department administers this grant. Now, this grant is audited regularly as part of the Eid Bailey audit. When they do the external audit, they're required to audit a certain number of federal grant awards to the city. So it does come up periodically when they do their annual audit. This particular audit was requested by the health department. They'd come up with a new procedure internally for administering the invoices for payments on this grant, and they started this process in January of 2012, and they wanted internal audit to make sure that the process that they'd come up with was working correctly. And the reason they came up with this process internally was to make sure they didn't have duplicate payments being made. And so we assisted the health department with that, and we had a few audit findings which they agreed to our recommendations. And I think we provided a service to the health department on that. And if there's any questions about that, we'd be happy to try and answer those.
Questions on this first one? Okay, good. Thank you, Rich.
Okay, the next one I have a PowerPoint on. So. Okay, this was on our audit plan, this fraud risk assessment, and we have done a fraud risk assessment in our first year of operation back in 2007. So this project was to kind of build upon that work, and it involved a lot of interviews with each of the directors by myself, and looking at issues we've had in the past with fraud in the city, and doing some research on fraud, especially in local government, and why people commit fraud, best practices, what we're doing that would be in concurrence with best practices, and if there's things that maybe we aren't doing that we should, we identify those as well. So obviously when you have fraud, you're going to have some sort of financial loss of some sort, but fraud can be devastating for local government beyond the financial cost. You can have the public can begin to lose trust in the government with the resources that they provided. Fraud can cause unwanted media interest, and obviously you can have a loss of employee morale as well. When there's a fraud case, people start wondering if all the employees are doing something like that. So it can be very devastating for morale purposes, for the loss of public trust, and of course the financial loss. And the best defense against fraud is a good offense. And so what are we talking about with fraud? I mean, there's a legal definition of fraud that attorneys are quite acquainted with, but in this case we're using more of the broad definition. And the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners that's basically the experts in this country that have done the research on fraud, And they define fraud as, especially occupational fraud, is when an individual is using their occupation for personal enrichment through the deliberate misuse or misapplication of their employer's economic resources. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. And that Association of Certified Fraud Examiners has three broad classifications of fraud. Corruption, which would be, an example would be bribery or kickbacks. Asset misappropriation would be the second category. That'd be basically stealing, stealing inventory or skimming cash, for example. And the third category, the broad category, would be financial statement fraud. And underneath these categories, I think there's up to 33 different categories that they have that complicated diagram, kind of a tree diagram, which I won't bore you with or confuse you with, but that's kind of the three main areas we're talking about. So what can go wrong in local government? And in the audit report, that fraud risk assessment, I think I have examples of on page 7 and 8 of the report from around the country of what can go wrong in government. And things like theft of inventory. Any local government is going to have a lot of dollars wrapped up in various inventory. You can have kickbacks. That's a real common fraud scheme in government. Skimming cash, in other words, stealing customer payments before they're recorded. Creating a fictitious company to build a government. That happens. Unauthorized use of a credit card, and many, many more. There's a lot of schemes that can be used to defraud a local government. And when I was preparing this slide, I easily could have come up with about 4 different slides. I have a file of fraud cases locally, and these are just sort of some of the bigger ones that you've probably heard about. Southeast Technical, about a $750,000 loss. Brookings had one, the 3M company in Brookings in 2010. They had a $5 million fraud scheme. It involved an employee setting up a fictitious company to invoice his company, his employer, and that went on for a while and defrauded the company of $5 million. And as you can see, just this last summer, the Volunteer Fire Department. And like I said, I could come up with 20 different fraud cases just here in the local area. It happens a lot, and these are the ones that just come to light. A lot of times when a fraud is discovered, the employer simply fires the employee and they don't prosecute it. It never becomes a story. And I'd like to emphasize that fraud is a human problem. It's not an accounting problem. It's not an internal control problem. And no organization is immune to fraud. And I'd also like to point out that frauds often start very, very small. This story is about a bookkeeper at a veterinary clinic in Texas, and she ended up stealing $350,000 from a veterinary clinic. And the first time that she committed the embezzlement, it was for $25.45. And she just kept testing the system, and she didn't get caught, and the thing just got out of hand. So that's typically what happens is things will start small. They'll test the system to see if they get caught, and it just kind of snowballs and from there. So researchers have come up with something they call the fraud triangle. In other words, to explain why people commit fraud. And the 3 points of that triangle are the pressure, which can be real or imagined. Something like, I have medical bills or I have credit card bills. I need cash. For some people, their need is, I want a luxury car, and I don't have one, so I want to have a luxury car. So there's some sort of pressure, whether it's real or imagined. There's an attitude or a rationalization. Typically, in their mind, the fraudsters, typically aren't career criminals, so in their mind they have to rationalize why they're doing this. They'll say, I need the money and I'll pay it back later when I'm on my feet again financially, or they'll say my company owes this to me, I got turned down for promotion, whatever it is. They have a way to rationalize their behavior. And then the perceived opportunity. And the only thing that management can control is that opportunity. And the research from the ACFE suggests that it's sort of like that bell curve that you study in school. Most of the people, that 80% of employees would commit fraud under the right set of circumstances. So it's not a case of just a bad 1 or 2%. It's really a large percentage of your population of employees under the right set of circumstances, under the right pressure, with the right opportunity, would consider committing fraud. And the latest survey that the ACFD did in 2012 estimated that the typical organization, this is just across government, across for-profit, not-profit, they lose 5% of their revenue to fraud each year. That's the estimate. And nobody knows the real figure because fraud is often covered up and it's not reported. But that's their best guess. The number one way that frauds are discovered is through tips. That's the number one way consistently, and that's why we have a fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. 87% of the occupational fraudsters had never been convicted of a fraud-related offense. And it's usually the smallest organizations that suffer the largest median loss, and that's because they typically don't have a proper segregation of duties. Often you just have, like in this case with the veterinary clinic, you have one bookkeeper doing everything and nobody's checking her work. When we did our fraud risk assessment, based upon our interviews with directors and what we've known in the past that we've had fraud cases, we believe these are four of the top vulnerabilities. But like I said, we could have any sort of type of fraud scheme going on. Locations where cash is received. Cash is a very highly liquid asset. It's very attractive for a fraudster to try and to steal. That's why we always include in our audit plan cash handling audits every year. Miscellaneous revenue streams, that would be those kind of orphan checks, the checks that maybe nobody was anticipating, they just sort of show up, and fraudsters will typically target those type of checks or that type of revenue that's maybe not invoiced, nobody was expecting. If it doesn't get receipted in, nobody is really looking for it, so that would be a vulnerability. The P cards, what we call the purchasing cards, those are like corporate credit cards that we issue to employees for low dollar purchases for purposes of efficiency. If somebody wanted to get something on the city P card and then use it for personal use, perhaps they could bypass the controls. If it appeared to be something that would be used in the office or the shop, it might be difficult for management to catch that all the time. And then the other category was the organizations that we fund that by the city, but they're outside our governance framework. In other words, we hire a company to do a service or manage a facility for us. They're not city employees. Maybe they don't have as much segregation of duties as we do in the finance department, so that we would consider that an area of vulnerability, and we have a lot of those. So. What are we already doing? Well, we're already doing a lot of those. We identified 25 best practices in our report based on our research. We're already doing a lot of the right things. We have a fraud control policy that the City Council just approved in November of last year. We've had the fraud hotline since 2008. That's an anonymous 800 number that city employees can call if they suspect fraud is going on. We've had internal audit for 6 years now, going on 7. Every year we have an external audit done of our financial statements. HR does background checks of employees, and it depends on the job that the person is applying for, which background checks they will do. So we do that. But as I said before, the statistic was, I think 87% of fraudsters had never been convicted of a crime before, so a lot of times you could do the criminal background check and the employee, they would pass. So, but we still do that and still recommend it. Internal controls implemented. For the most part, we could say that we have internal controls implemented. So, and then we've had the employee assistant program for many years now. That allows employees to get help with counseling for financial troubles, family issues, addiction problems, at a relatively low cost, and we have, I think, contracts with Avera and with Sanford, I believe. So employees have access to that. That can be a cause, a lot of times, of why people will get involved in stealing from their employer. They have personal issues that come up. Okay, what more can we do? One thing that can be very effective is simply fraud awareness training. when I've talked to the directors, that's something that we haven't done except for the exception of the health department, and I think they have a requirement to do that because of their federal grants. All the directors were uniformly supportive of that, to have some sort of fraud awareness training for management, for employees, what fraud is, why people commit fraud, what fraud schemes look like, what to do about it if you think that's going on, that sort of thing. We have done unannounced cash counts and asset verifications in the past. We're going to increase those starting this year. That's always a good deterrent, the perception of detection. We're going to be working with the finance department to verify segregation of duty in key areas. Ethics training, we've done that 5 years ago. It's probably time to do that again. This would be separate from the fraud awareness training. And monitoring tone at the top via employee survey. We started an employee survey last year. We'd like to add a couple of questions to that survey. This is an anonymous survey of city employees. To add a couple of questions about what they call tone at the top, or what the attitude of management is to ethics and that sort of thing. So, but we had a number of other steps in there that we'll be implementing as well in 2013. But like I say, in conclusion, I'd say we're already doing a lot of the right things. I think that if we implement some of these action steps in 2013, I think we'll make the anti-fraud environment even better. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer those.
Great. Questions from Councilor Staggers?
Rich, how many phone calls have we received on the fraud hotline since 2008?
Since 2008, I can't give you the total, but I'd say it was an average of 2 to 3 a year. And typically, they're not necessarily, somebody's embezzling from the city. That sort of a call. It might be one that's maybe not quite like that, but.
Have we had any success in finding fraud by way of that telephone line?
I would say we haven't had what I call a true bona fide fraud case, but we still strongly want to keep that fraud line in place, and we will be continuing to advertise it, if you will, to employees. We have the placards on the bulletin boards. I think we're going to probably do a new one in 2013, just change it up, change the color. Do another mailing. We've done 2 of those in the last 5 years where we mail something to employees' house with the number and what it's to be used for. And typically when we do that, we always get a call within a week on something. So that's something that you should always have it. I mean, it's cheap insurance. It doesn't cost much. It's just good to have out there. So.
Good. Councilor Entman?
Yeah, Rich, I think this is very good. I think just by the list of the examples that you showed us earlier, just keeping this aware for staff and a point of conversation, I think, is very good to keep that awareness out there. So I think this is
I think that's especially that fraud awareness training. The ACFE said that's probably the #1 most effective way of preventing fraud in your organization. Have fraud awareness training, because usually it's the frontline employees and the managers. They know what's going on. The auditors can't be everywhere. Auditors might miss something. It's the people that are doing the work that might notice something is amiss.
And the items that you listed there. Things that you check to see if we're doing already. It looks like we're doing very good as far as being tuned into what we can do to protect fraud at the city level and stuff. So I think that's good. And the recommendation that we looking at it in the future, I think, is very good too. So I think good.
And just last year there was a notorious case in local government. It's kind of like when things go really wrong. It happened to deal with a small city in Illinois. It was Dixon, Illinois. Had the city controller had taken $53 million from the city over 20 years. It was just a shocking case of when things go really, really wrong, what can happen. Usually, if we have a fraud case in the city, it probably wouldn't be something that would bankrupt us, but in the case of Dixon, it almost did. So.
Wow. Any other questions on this one? Councilor Staggers?
Rich, have you taken a look at the city health cards by any chance?
The city health
Cards?
cards?
Yes. I understand the health department has these cards they give out. Am I correct on that, or maybe wrong?
I don't know anything about the health cards.
Okay.
Are you talking about like the health clinic?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
No, I'm not aware of that. No.
Thank you.
Good, thank you, Rich.
Okay, I have one more report.
Yes, you do.
Yes, we may have a few more questions on that.
Yes. Light and power.
Light and power, and this was, originally we discussed it at the October meeting of the audit committee, and then it was deferred until December because the audit committee had some more questions about one of our recommendations. And I'll get right to that point. But first of all, I'd just like to commend the light department that our conclusion was they're doing a good job. They're very effective and efficient, providing a great service to to their customers, and doing a good job with the street lighting. Probably the number one recommendation we had to do with using the user fees to pay for the repair and maintenance of the street lights. We felt that that's something that benefits all the citizens of Sioux Falls, and not thinking that we should probably be using user fees to pay for the repair and maintenance of the streetlights. Now, the electricity for the streetlights, that's always been paid out of the general fund, which is just everybody contributes to the general fund, all the taxpayers. But for example, the labor costs for maintaining and repairing the streetlights have been paid out of the Light Enterprise Fund. And prior to our audit, the Public Works is already of the same mind. They were already making efforts to start moving the expenses, some of those expenses, over from Light Department Enterprise over to the general fund, and had a plan to do it over, I think, starting in 2012 and then finishing in 2015. And so a question from the audit committee is there a way that we could accelerate that? Do we need to do it over 4 years? Can we just get it done, move all those associated costs over? And so you can see there's an additional response there, I believe on page 5 of your report, of your hard copy there, where Public Works said, working with finance, they believe they can get that accelerated so that we can just get that done. And then the other question was had to do with the inventory, the supplies and materials inventory, and when we did our sample count, it was fairly inaccurate. Of the 40% of the items that we counted, it wasn't 40% of the dollar value, but 40% of the items that we sampled were inaccurate, and there's various reasons for that. Sometimes it was an overage or an underage. And our recommendations were trying to address that inventory accuracy and getting a kind of a work order system, and maybe trying to make that a little bit better on the inventory accuracy. And you can see the response from management with their action plan to do that. Now, I'm sure you might have some questions. I'd be happy to try and answer those. Otherwise, we have Public Works here to also address the questions as well. So,
Great, thank you. Questions from council regarding the light and power audit? Really? All right. Thank you. Thank you, Rich.
we have more questions. Okay, thank you very much.
Good, covered it. All right, thank you. Moving on our presentations to the Railroad Relocation MOU discussion, sort of a continuation of last week's conversation. Reminder that this is a memorandum of understanding. It is not a contract that the council would approve, but I know that council had questions, so I invited Mr. Cotter to join us, please.
All right. Josh is going to provide you a handout here that we'll talk about. Good afternoon, Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. I just have a few notes to just, I think, put the MOU into some perspective, and then we'll get to questions if we could. Again, I think we've shared that this MOU is a non-binding agreement between the BNSF and the City of Sioux Falls. It essentially establishes those basic terms for a purchase of the downtown rail yard if the straight sale becomes the preferred option through the environmental assessment. This MOU is just one component of a much larger community project that's been underway for almost 2 decades to really revitalize downtown and take downtown further. Most likely don't remember how blighted the area was north of 5th and Phillips from a standpoint of what it was like before Phillips to the Falls was extended, but now it's improved traffic flow. It's expanded the park, and it also has opened up land that has been redeveloped. The next project that we're working on is called the Railroad Relocation Project, and it focuses primarily on the east side of the Big Sioux River, and it generally is between 5th and 11th Street Viaduct. A feasibility study was wrote in 2001. A conceptual phasing plan was laid out in 2002. Congress authorized federal funds for the project in 2005, and in 2006, the local authority for the project and the funding was brought before the City Council. I do have that attached, or that handout, if you want to just refer to that, because there was a question the other day that we talked through about the actual authority of the funding. So if you have a chance to pick up this sheet, this is the sheet that you commonly see every month in Tracy Turbeck's monthly financial report, and the highlighted project is called the Railroad Relocation Plan. That gets booked in this report because it's an authorized project in the capital plan. Each year in the capital books that you receive midsummer, it's the mayor's draft capital plan from all 12 departments. And then when we come before you in August timeframe and talk about those key projects, later in September and in October, there's an ordinance and a resolution passed to appropriate the funds and adopt the plan. So that step for the railroad relocation started back in 2006. And then as the project progressed, additional design and construction dollars were added to ultimately reach this authorized funding level that's on this sheet of the $36,790,000. Okay? So I just wanted to take a step back and know that there's an authority level that came at the federal level, but there's also an authority level that comes at the local level. And that's done every year at the city council level, that there's a good debate, and then ultimately you adopt a plan which authorizes projects and funding, and then staff goes out and carries those steps out, whether they're negotiating easements, purchasing right-of-way, designing projects, letting contracts, facilitating construction, and then ultimately closing them out. And that's essentially the same step we're carrying out here in the railroad relocation, just with this being such a community project that we wanted to share with you the MOU because it really does set up the purchase and sale agreement. Since 2006, we've studied a number of alternatives working to balance input from the residences, businesses, this body, and also the city of Brandon. We had certainly had a full appreciation of all the project challenges. Back in June of 2012, the city went back to BNSF and asked for their assistance. We asked BNSF, are there any other alternatives or ideas that you have that we should consider to incorporate in the EA? We're fortunate that BNSF did involve a new team, and they did come back with a new idea that ultimately is the alternative that we've been really focused on here since August. The idea is BNSF would make some improvements to their network regionally and set us up for a straight sale of the downtown yard. Since early August, the project team of Federal Highway, Department of Transportation, BNSF, Benish, our consultant, and the city team has scheduled 2 conference calls every week to talk about this project and keep the process forward since it is such a priority project. Tuesday is the MOU call, and Wednesday is the EA call, and Josh knows this very well because he's our project manager that leads this facilitation. And so to wrap, last week I really thought we had a good discussion on the MOU. We talked about the environmental faults of the land, the proposed fence that would improve safety on the property line, right to terminate language. We addressed the Ellison Eastern first right of refusal question, and also the methodology that will develop the purchase price. And just to highlight that component, we will acquire this property through the Uniform Act that was adopted by Congress in 1970. This is the very fair and consistent approach that land is purchased across the country when federal funds are used. At times, as we talk about, this can be a very rigorous process, but again, it's the very fair and consistent way. It takes multiple levels of justification to reach the end, but it is the standard that we intend to follow. The MOU work product has been reviewed extensively by the project team, again, of Federal Highway Administration, Department of Transportation, BNSF, Benish, our consultant, and the city, and is a key. It's one of the 3 documents for this project. We've established the operational plan. This is the MOU. The next document that we'll focus on for the next 3 months is the EA. And so I know I was asked last week, are you comfortable with the document? We're very comfortable with the document, and we hope we've answered your questions. We'd like to move this forward.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Cotter. Any further questions from council on the MOU? Councilor Anderson.
Yeah, Mark, let's go to Article 3, binding obligations. I'd like you to go over that a little bit further as far as which parts of item or Article 3 will be binding when this MOU is signed. That's the way I'm sort of reading that there's some parts of this section that will be binding, and that's basically just how we will execute the MOU. Am I reading that correctly?
Right. Well, essentially, the term is laid out, that's binding, that those 3 areas, both parties agree in writing to, that would be binding if both parties agree to terminate the MOU, parties enter into the purchase and sale agreement, or on December 31st, unless it's mutually extended by the city and BNSF, that the MOU would essentially terminate at that point in time. Project costs and expenses, we've both agreed that if there are costs borne by each entity, that we'll bear those ourselves, and so that's a binding piece. And then last is that we'll negotiate in good faith. And so those are, the majority of the document is the guidance of how we would proceed forward to purchase the property, but there has to be a couple of those aspects binding on ultimately the termination of this MOU.
And if I can ask one more question on this. If both parties do not agree, let's say the city wants to back out of this, are we going to be able to back out of this before we sign the PSA?
Maybe rephrase that if you would.
Well, it says both parties agree in writing to terminate the MOU. So now if both parties don't agree, let's just say only one party wants to terminate the MOU, how is that going to be done?
Well, I would say if one party wanted to terminate but the other didn't, the party that wanted to terminate will probably just hold out till December 31st.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Councilor Karski.
One concern I have on this, under 3.4, the project costs and expenses, and we have to, what did you call it, the Uniform Act? What is going to be the cost of that appraisal, and is that compensable by the money that's there back to the city upon the purchase agreement? Do we have any idea?
It is. It's and we do this on a number of projects already when we use federal funds on projects. But the appraisal cost, going out and hiring the expert that's qualified to do this work, that is eligible costs. And and there's just there's a whole number of steps that the federal highway officials in Pierre, they do. This is the only way they purchase property, and so they're very in tune to those steps.
Is it only going to be reimbursed if the deal goes through? I mean, there is a cost. It says that we're going to bear the cost of that. What is the cost of an appraisal like this?
I wouldn't want to quote it offhand. I mean, we do a number of them, but this is somewhat unique, and so I wouldn't want to value it like a straight. And so once we seek out those professionals, we'll certainly share that cost with you. If that helps.
You know, I'm just a little concerned that we're obligating ourselves to an expense here that we probably haven't funded for, and I guess know what that expense is.
Well, just in general, the project team has, when we went back to them in June, we asked for, are there any other ideas or alternatives? And though we can't sort of forecast what the end result is, but we all made it very clear that the project team wants this to come in underneath the federal funding amount. And so I would say if we complete the environmental assessment and the straight sale becomes the preferred alternative, then we'll execute the project as such. And again, we don't know what those costs are yet, but we'll keep you abreast at that.
Okay, Councilor Intamin.
You know, Mark, I think this is extremely exciting for those of us that have been around for a long time. You're right. The early 1990s, a lot of discussion was taking place about what we're going to do with the blighted area in downtown Sioux Falls, and of course moving the railroad tracks was part of it. And then, of course, in 2005, like you said, then into 2006, as under Mayor Munson, you started to move forward with this progress. It was, you know, and all the work done by our congressional delegation to make this thing happen, you know, was it was really accolades were spread out amongst a lot of people back in 2005 and 2006 because of it. It was quite troublesome coming up to the present that things seem to be very slow. And I mean, just as late as last summer, the mayor came away from a meeting that you'd had with the Burlington people up in the Twin Cities, very disheartened and very disappointed. I know you were too, you know, thinking that the thing was coming to a halt. And then now, all of a sudden, to have the excitement of them coming back to us and saying, hey, I think we found a way. Are you guys still excited and interested about moving ahead with this? And, by the way, we're going to fall under the appropriated dollars the way it looks. And you were able, through discussion, to get the cooperation of the state and the Fed all involved in this. I think that this can be really a great win-win for the city of Sioux Falls, and I'm excited about the next phase, about, you know, checking out what the appraisal is going to be, what the purchase of the property is going to be. And I think the team did a good job, and I'm glad that you kept your nose to the grindstone on this one. So I think the citizens of Sioux Falls should be excited about this. I know we do know we're going to still have several, 3 lines going through the downtown area, but I drove down there and walked it again here just last week, and just the imagination of how it's going to change the landscape of downtown Sioux Falls, I think, is absolutely fantastic. So again, great job, and I hope to hear some more good news as we go forward with this. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks goes out to the entire project team. I can tell you all the partners, I don't believe, have ever worked this good together, so things are moving really well.
Great. Councilor Aguilar.
Mark, we had hired a consulting company to help us with the environmental impact study. Are they still under contract with us?
They are. That's Benish. That's when I mentioned Alfred Benish Company.
Okay, and how long will they, I mean, the whole premise of how this is going forward has changed. How long will we keep them under contract?
We'll keep them under contract for sure through the end of the environmental assessment. Our goal right now is to essentially complete the entire action for the environmental assessment by mid of 2013. And then we sit down and start to negotiate the PSA, the purchase and sale agreement, second half of the year. But essentially their work is done once the environmental assessment's done. So I would expect by the midsummer. You will see them too. Soon you'll be getting an invitation that we'll have the next public meeting on January 31st. And you'll see Benish at that again, and we'll give an update on the work that they've been doing on the environmental assessment. There's a lot of good work that's been done, and and there'll be more done before that public meeting.
Okay, Counselor Jameson.
I would just like to share that last week, Thursday, Mark Cotter reached out to me and we had a meeting. Of course, I had raised some concerns about the MOU, and Mark reached out to me to try to go through them individually, and we took quite some time. In fact, I got a parking ticket because of it. I thought I paid enough, but I didn't. Mark kept talking and talking and talking. But one of the biggest concerns I shared with Mark was some of the language in the MOU that refers to the earmark. And my concern that there was this somewhat of a reckless characteristic that we had $36 million, and as long as it's under that, it's okay. And what I was reassured of, through Mark's help, was that the elaborate steps that the federal government requires, the state requires, in order for these funds to be reimbursed, essentially, for those expenditures in this purchase. So Mark's done a great job of relieving me of my concern of these drunken sailors out there spending money. So I really appreciate that work, Mark. And part of the other issue is that I hear from a lot of people about the fact that we might be spending $35 million recklessly on 9.5 acres. And so that prompted me to do a little research. And I had asked Mark in the early days if he had done any research on similar purchases or sales like this. There's this funny thing out there called Google. Have you guys heard of this, Google? Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's on the internet. Al Gore did it. All right, that's an inside joke. Anyway, there are all kinds of activities going around in the country that have occurred, rail yards that have been sold, that are in the transition of being sold. Lots of good examples. And what I learned, Mark, and I'll share this with you as well, is that they're fair deals. Mm-hmm. Carlsbad, New Mexico was one of the best examples. 35 acres of land sold for $107,000 right on the river. I mean, that'd be like buying CNA property, the Shonem's property, the Sharapa Place property, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. With Burlington Northern, these guys are fair, I think. And I think that's what we're going to find out, is that Burlington Northern is going to be fair. And we've got all kinds of checks and balances in place to assure that it's a fair deal. Anyway, I put Mark through the ringer on this MOU, and still a few issues in here, like the fence, but I'll live with that. But I want to commend Mark and his staff for all their work and efforts here. It's this process, and like a lot of these others that I found, have been going on for decades. This takes a long time to negotiate, to educate the public on how it works, and who's involved, who has the money, who's paying for it. So we're not alone in this. But again, I just wanted to acknowledge that I did come a long way in this conversation. Last week I was very disappointed. This week I'm happy. Thanks, Mark.
You're welcome.
Good. Other questions or comments from council members? I do have a couple of questions for you, very basic questions,
Okay.
Mr. Cotter.
Okay.
If we don't spend this money, I mean, we've got 36-something million, and it's technically federal money that will be reimbursed to us. If we don't spend that money, if we don't spend all of it, or if we, just decide we're not going to do this, we're not buying it, forget it, walk away, what happens to that money? Does that come back to the city then, and we get to spend it on something else? Or where does that go?
No. Congress authorized these dollars specifically for this project and this project only. And so unless you go back into Congress to change the law, which we expect is a very slim chance, if this project comes in under the federal funding level, which we expect it will, the remaining dollars will go back to the federal government.
I think that's really important for us to understand, is that this is not, I mean, it is our money because we're taxpayers, we pay federal taxes, but it is not city money. And we really are working hard to keep it under that number so that we aren't spending city money on this particular project. Mm-hmm. So I echo the gentleman's comments about the amount of work that's gone into this. It's been an interesting lesson, I think, in seeing how federal money is spent in the city of Sioux Falls on other smaller projects, we've seen it sort of a microcosm of what you folks do on a daily basis, and we appreciate you being as open and transparent with this as you have been. And moving forward, you know, this is information that we don't, as a council, have to see, and we got to this time, and it's pretty cool. And so I commend all of you for your questions, and I commend you and your team for your work on this project, and good luck.
You're welcome.
January.
I'll ask the mayor to execute the agreement tomorrow, and then look for the meeting invite for the next public meeting on January 31st.
January 31st. Good. Thank you, Mr. Cotter and team. Anything else for the informational meeting? Yes, Councilor Jameson.
Sorry, I meant to bring it up at the open discussion, but I saw some notes on the citizen survey that's being developed. Will the council have any involvement in developing any of those questions or reviewing that before it goes out?
Yeah, the questions are already done, I believe. Councilor Ensman, go ahead.
I think the way it was explained to us, and maybe, I don't see Tracy, but maybe Mike can help answer it. The questions that go out are a survey that is pretty much done throughout the entire nation, and it's a very generic, the same questions are asked. It's my understanding, I think the city had an opportunity to put in input into 3 questions only on the survey. The survey is done also, you know, it's used to compile on a national basis, so there's comparisons and ratings, but that's my understanding. I believe is the way it was. Mike, I didn't know if, or I'm sorry, Tracy,
please.
please.
Tracy Turbeck, Finance Director, to come up and address that. That has been his project. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you. Tracy Turback with the Finance Office. That is correct. The vast majority of the questions on the survey are identical to questions that we asked 3 or 4 years ago now when we did the last citizen survey. And they are identical questions to those that are asked in many other communities around the country. So we can benchmark not only the results not only against our own results from 4 years ago, but from other communities. And we ask for results compared to communities of similar size around the country that participate in this same survey. So that's really the significant value of the survey itself.
Does that answer anything else?
I just remember was it 4 years ago, that there was quite a discussion about those questions and how valuable that data is. And I think there were several open-ended questions or something, but I thought we had a participation role in that before.
Excuse me, but if I can interrupt, there is one open-ended question that we're allowed in the survey, and so there will be one open-ended question just asking people essentially what can we do to improve the community of Sioux Falls. So we're just kind of giving people a blank slate and asking for their input on what they see as priorities in the Sioux Falls community.
Then if I might, part of the point is that you want to ask the same questions each time so that you compare apples to apples, and I think that's basically what's happening
Right.
here. So those
That's
questions that we had input on 4 years ago would be similar. Other comments or questions? Thank you, Tracy. Appreciate that. Anything else for this meeting? Before I adjourn, I will announce Public Services Committee meeting will begin in 10 minutes by the Carnegie clock. That would be 5:20, and this meeting is adjourned.